Good Saturday afternoon to you. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to this week's discussion on the hurricane season. This week, we're going to be talking about a record hurricane season forecast put out by, I should say, University of Pennsylvania, not PSU, but a record hurricane season forecast nonetheless. We're going to go over it. Plus more as well. We have severe weather too to talk about, which we'll talk about at the end, and of course our usual hurricane season stuff for this week. So thank you for coming along. Hope you enjoy. And let's get started. First of all, with the countdown till June 1st, we are now at 35 days till the hurricane season begins. Getting close to that 30-day mark, and actually next week will be under the 30 days. So hurricane season is definitely coming very soon. And I mean, I've been telling you throughout the whole off season that, especially as we get closer towards the season, it would fly by. And for sure, time is going by very quickly. And before you know it, we're almost into May. And before you know it, we'll be into June, and hurricane season will be upon us. Talking about hurricane season, though, Michael Mann from University of Pennsylvania has released their 2024 hurricane season forecast. And let's just say it is literally breaking the internet. Everybody's going crazy over the forecast. Why? Because this year they are forecasting a whopping 33 named storms. And they mentioned that this is their median for what they forecast, which corresponds to a range between 27 and 39 named storms. 39 named storms. If we get that this year, that would actually be record for the most amount of named storms in a single tropical cyclone basin in a year on record, something that only the Western Pacific has in its record book. So that's what the University of Pennsylvania is forecasting. And I guess it's not too surprising that they're very aggressive. Certainly surprising that they are aggressive as they are, going with 39 storms. I don't necessarily think that that might happen, but obviously, knowing history, usually things don't always happen the way we think it does. Usually something that we think is impossible does not mean that it is actually in reality, does not mean that it is impossible. I mean, that was proven in 2020. We all thought that 2005 wouldn't be broken with its 28 storms, but in 2020 we ended up getting 30. So maybe they're right. Maybe they're onto something. But nonetheless, it just goes on to further the point that everybody is really, really aggressive on an active hurricane season. And we could see that if we look at the sea surface temperature anomalies for today. The Atlantic is very warm, and it continues to be so. Near record anomalies, and we're actually going to look at several tweets about that. But the Atlantic, it just remains to be really warm. And I've actually seen a lot of people talk about this specific area in the subtropics and off the East Coast. And I've seen people mention how it might impact how we get landfalls this season. And all I'm going to say to that is it's actually good that we're getting this kind of cold over warm signal, because if you remember, if you look back, if you did watch my predictions video, it actually correlates very well with very high ACE hyperactive hurricane seasons that we get this cold over warm signal, because this helps to focus the energy in the deep tropics. It helps reduce instability issues, so we end up getting a lot more longer tracked, stronger storms that originate out of the deep tropics, rather than 2020, for instance, where we have energy spread out across the entire basin. And as a result, sometimes we deal with instability, sometimes we deal with more dry air, and that may result in storms not being as strong or as much in terms of ACE producing. Generally, storms don't reach their full potential as opposed to a year like this where we get cold over warm. Generally, it just fits in with really active hurricane seasons, and it's just an overall favorable signal. And the fact that we have that almost perfectly, no, actually quite literally perfectly, we have cold, and especially this area over the Canary Current too, very, very warm, definitely correlates to a very active season. And La Nina developing out here in the Pacific too, and also off the Baja Peninsula in the Northern Pacific, part of the PDO, that is also cold as well. And that also helps, and that also kind of goes hand in hand with La Nina too. And this is also another plus for the Atlantic as well. It kind of helps to suppress any sort of rising air in the Pacific, and especially with an Atlantic this warm, it'll really concentrate in the Atlantic. Really quickly going over Atlantic sea surface temperature anomalies on average. This is updated yesterday. Let's see if it's actually updated to. There it is. Update as of today. At a value of 1.2 Celsius averaged across the entire MDR. Still remains very warm, and it has been ever since. This is February, so basically since the beginning of the year we've been at near record levels. And it's not changed at all. We've had a huge westerly wind event. As I mentioned last week, we had trades blowing from the west. We were going to have a more westerly wind event, and as a result, we would start seeing more warming in the MDR. And indeed, we've seen a huge spike. And this is actually some questions about whether or not this is actually valid, given that satellite data like this tends to be a little biased towards Saharan air, which is why sometimes we see massive dips in sea surface temperatures in the MDR when there's Saharan air around, and there's Saharan air in the MDR. But once it clears, sea surface temperature anomalies then begin to skyrocket. So that might be a little bit of a factor into why we're seeing these anomalies spike really big. But nonetheless, the MDR is still very warm, and that doesn't look like it's going to change at all. And in fact, Ben Knoll tweeted that about 40% of the MDR is currently warmer in late April than it typically is in July. So basically, this means the MDR is warmer than average than what it is in July. But the thing is, we're in late April. And even this map that he used is from April 21st, so it is a few days behind. And if we look at the map around April 20th or so, you could see we were kind of we were not as warm as we are right now, at least with the data that maybe he's using. Maybe the data he's using is a little different. But the MDR is still very warm. We've talked about this throughout the entire winter. And he actually goes on to say that in April, as of this April right now, only 2010 has warmer sea surface temperatures in the MDR than 2024. So we're only behind by 1 year. All of the other years, and you can take a look at this graph, we're right near 2005. But after that, in terms of at least modern sea surface temperature anomalies, we're really up there, besides with last year. And I'm actually going to go over a little bit of comparison, at least using NOAA Coral Reef Watch, because Ben Knoll's data set is a little different. He uses ERA 5. They're just different data sets that we use, different methods to calculate sea surface temperature anomalies, but in the end, they generally usually all get around somewhat similar results. But bottom line, the Atlantic is very warm. We're ahead of 2005, which is actually, the fact that we're ahead of 2005, and we all know how that year played out. Very incredible. It's not the end though, because I've also seen a tweet from Richard Dixon. Let me see if I could find it. But this is the tweet. Here it is. He mentions another look at projecting the MDR development region sea surface temperatures going forward based on historical warming behavior. From this point, April 24th, this is what from the graph is, from April 24th and onward, even if we only hit the 10th percentile of warming since 2024, we will end up only 0.2 degrees cooler than 2023. So basically what he's saying, if the MDR barely warms from now through the rest of the year, we will only be slightly colder than last year was. And that is insane, honestly, because last year was really, really warm. And you got to remember, too, because of how warm the Atlantic was last year, it was able to suppress the effects of what was a pretty strong El Nino last year. And now that we're going to have that warmth replicated, in fact, it'll probably be even warmer, judging by if we go by the mean warming. You can see here, this year, this is what is projected for this year if we warmed at a normal rate, I guess, at least assuming from the map. That's what that means. We are still going to be warmer than last year. And the difference between last year and this year is that this year we have potential La Nina conditions coming on as opposed to last year. It is we were in an El Nino and we still had near record warm sea surface temperature anomalies for the entire year, especially from this point onward. And we still had a very active season. And actually, since we're talking about last year, I thought maybe, let's compare between last year and this year and some other years in here as well, just to kind of see where we are in terms of sea surface temperature anomalies. So really quickly, this is this year. This is as of April 26th. Again, the map always updates a day behind, so this is the latest for at least what we have right now from the NOAA Coral Reef Watch. And how does it look like year to date from last year? I mean, you could see it. We're leagues ahead of this year, especially in the MDR. A lot more of these widespread 2 Celsius isotherms across the MDR. But this is really the closest we are, besides maybe 2005. Really warm, especially across the eastern MDR. Maybe the eastern MDR was slightly warmer last year, especially through the Canary Current. That area got really warm around this time of year. But the MDR as a whole, the Caribbean, if we look back at that again, the Caribbean is definitely not as warm as it is this year. The Caribbean kind of warms up only as we went into July. But bottom line, we're warmer than last year, and it is quite incredible because look at the Pacific. We were in an incoming El Nino, while this year, if we look back at this year, completely different case in the Pacific, honestly. Kind of interesting how the difference of a year makes, right? We had this really warm, especially off Central America. It was really, really warm. Anomalies, I think, exceeding 8 degrees Celsius above normal off South America. So we had a very strong incoming El Nino, well, as opposed to this year, we have basically the exact opposite occurring. What about 2020, though? That's another year we always talk about a lot. And let's look at that 2020. This is 2020 right now, and let's compare it to this year. I mean, it does not even compare, honestly. And this is actually the caveat that we quite often talk about with 2020. You notice how it was very warm. It looked very warm across the entire basin, but in the MDR specifically, not so much. We had a lot of warmth here. We had a lot of warmth in the southern MDR, and especially the Gulf was very, very warm this time of year. I think even the Gulf was stretching record limits as well around this time of year. But we didn't really have that much activity in terms of, not activity, but we really weren't that warm in terms of sea surface temperature anomalies this time of year, at least across the MDR. I think we did especially warm up much later in the season, but throughout the season as a whole, 2020 was very spread out in terms of how its energy was distributed across the Atlantic. And that's very different from this year. We see all these anomalies very concentrated, especially in the deep tropics. And it's very interesting because despite that, we still had 30 named storms this year. Even though the configuration, you would think, maybe not nowhere near as favorable as it was this year. So it's really one of those instances that you got to question, if 2020 was able to produce 30 named storms with this kind of look, then what in God's name are we going to produce with this kind of look this year? And then we could kind of maybe see the difference with that if we finally look at 2005. And honestly, out of all these 3 years, maybe 2023 is a little bit better than 2005. But even then, 2005, in terms of the best match for what is supposed to happen this year, because 2005 was a neutral ENSO going into a very weak La Nina that happened at the very end of the season, but it was still a La Nina nonetheless. 2005 in comparison to this year, still much, much warmer, especially in the eastern MDR. So yeah, it's inevitable, honestly, that this season could potentially be very active. And then we all know how 2005 was. We had four Category 5s. We had Katrina, Rita, Wilma, and then there was Emily earlier on as well. We all remember how 2005 was, and even if we were not tracking it in real time, we know at least our history about 2005. Very active season, most active season on record till we had 2020. just several years ago, and the fact that we're even ahead of 2005 definitely speaks volumes as to what the look is for this year. So that is that, kind of just comparing the MDR to the past few years, and it just really goes to show just how much of a league of its own the MDR is in this year. It's honestly incredible. But on the flip side of that, with the Nino 3.4 or with the El Nino, not really on the flip side, but had to do some sort of transition, you know what I mean? But anyways, with the Nino 3.4, another factor that is just really building into this hype around the idea of a really active season. Dipping so far, we're now at zero point 0.6, and we actually, I'll be honest, I really did feel like this did kind of last a little longer than I thought it would. The Nino 3.4, I mean, we've kind of gone over the last few weeks, kind of going back and forth between a period of trades in which we would see the Nino 3.4 crash, and then we would have a small, brief break in the trades, or maybe a little bit of westerly wind bursts, and then we would see the Nino 3.4 go back up, and then trades would increase, and we would see the Nino 3.4 crash again. But bottom line, definitely on an overall weakening trend, especially if we compare it to much earlier in the year. And that just goes to show that La Nina is on its way, for sure. And I mean, if we compare it to also to the weekly updates from the CPC, they also too have it at a weak Nina as well. Their average from this past week or last week, updated as of this Monday. We're going to get another value update this coming Monday, so the 29th. This it's a PDF. Here it is by the Climate Prediction Center. This is the recent evolution, current status, and predictions. You could easily search this up. Just search up CPC ENSO weekly, and you'll get this. And you'll get this easily. Updates every Monday, and as of this past Monday, we are at 0.7 degrees Celsius above normal in the Nino 3.4. So weak El Nino now, definitely on its way out. And even if we look at the Nino 3, we're actually only at 0.5 Celsius, and that actually might be lower once come Monday, because if we look at back at the Pacific, the Nino 3 region is right in here, I believe. And look at that, we've been having a lot of colder anomalies pop up in that area, especially over the last week. We've really seen these colder anomalies advance westward across the equatorial Pacific. So really, that signature of La Nina is coming on right now. And over the next few weeks, it's only going to continue, and this will probably drop. And before you know it, the Nino 3.4 will drop as well. So that is that when it comes to ENSO. Really quickly, though, I want to take a live look at how the Atlantic looks. A satellite shot, you kind of see the whole Atlantic. And we actually did have quite a bit of interesting stuff this week, surprisingly. If you saw on my Twitter page, and I also posted on a YouTube community post, we actually did indeed have an area of interest out here in the far eastern subtropics. Right around here, there was a small swirl, low-level swirl that seemed like it was trying. It was detached from fronts. It honestly had it, but there was just a lot of dry air in the vicinity, and convection wasn't persistent enough that it wasn't able to form. But it was tagged by the NHC. Only a 10-10 chance, again, because not really much development was expected from it at all, but it was a cool little feature, and it happened in the Eastern MDR. But since then, nothing much has happened, and you can see why it didn't develop. I mean, look at all this low-level clouds, all this low-level action, indicative of mid-level dry air, lots of Saharan air out there as well. Also why we saw the graphs kind of tank when it comes to sea surface temperature anomalies. They tanked for a little bit because we had a really big Saharan air outbreak this past week, I think. Yeah, this past week. But lots of dry air out there. It's only April though, and also we have a nice mid-level system here as well. And over the United States too, there's a bunch of severe thunderstorms firing over portions of Oklahoma and Nebraska once again today, and we're going to talk about it in a little bit. But there is quite a bit of severe weather expected over the plains, and it's starting right now actually, and it's supposed to continue for the rest of the evening as well. But why I want to show you this, Well, because I want to show you this map. This is the 850 millibar relative vorticity. And it's just kind of a nice, cool thing to look at. This is a look at the vorticity in the lower levels of the atmosphere, so closer to the surface where we are, although not quite. This is more or less actually 3,000 or 5,000 feet up. I'm not quite sure. But this is in the lower levels of the atmosphere. And this is something that is really neat to look at, and we'll be looking at this a lot more, especially as we get closer towards the season, because right now we're not really going to use it much. I mean, there's nothing really going on out there, especially in the MDR. But you could actually see here this big extratropical feature right now. If you look at the 850 millibar vorticity, there it is. You can see it. Lots of vorticity associated with it, although it is very stretched out and elongated. Again, extratropical, not expected to do anything, obviously. But it'll be really neat to see how we have all of this right now, and especially you can see the vorticity with that severe weather system brewing up over the plains and over Oklahoma. But it'll be very neat to see that we see all of this right now and watch in the next few weeks as all of this vorticity begins to go away and we begin to fill the tropics with a lot more of these oranges and yellows, especially once we start getting more tropical waves to come off. Well, tropical waves to start coming off because they haven't yet. But once again, it is late April, and very soon we will see tropical waves come off. All of this energy in the mid latitudes will lift northward. We'll start to see shear decrease in the Atlantic, and before you know it, hurricane season will be here. So definitely a lot of changes expected over the next several weeks. And we'll actually look at this again next week on Saturday, just to kind of keep tabs and see any changes we have. If maybe we've seen a little bit more of this energy lift northward, or maybe if we've seen any more energy, just to be curious, just to see how it looks this time next week. We'll review it again, just to see. But that is that, at least when it comes to 850 millibar vorticity. Now on to severe weather, because as I mentioned before, there is a severe weather outbreak ongoing today, unfortunately, across Oklahoma and Nebraska, especially on the heels of what they had yesterday. It was a very significant outbreak. I saw it all, and my heart and prayers goes out to everybody that was affected. We did have not one, but multiple really intense tornadoes touch down across Nebraska and Iowa, I believe. And the damage does look pretty bad, I will say that. But today, the activity is shifted a lot more to the south. And the main focus today will be over Oklahoma. And in fact, they have tornado watches right now in effect. And one of them is a PDS tornado watch in effect for central western Oklahoma. And it expires, I think that is 9 p.m. Tonight in terms of Eastern time, probably 8 p.m. Central time. Let me see if this is updated at all. No, it is not. So there is severe weather expected, moderate risk in effect, and let's actually really quickly look at the chances. Very significant when it comes to tornadoes again. There's a significant hatched area where we could see significant tornadoes anywhere between EF2 or higher. And the wind and hail threats are huge. Hail is maxed out completely in terms of, at least that it has. It's not maxed out, I shouldn't have said that, but it has a significant chance of occurring. Large hail especially, and we even have a 45% chance that we could see hail in general. So very high end event expected for today as well, and even into tomorrow. Slight risk in effect, and there's the risk for tornadoes, wind, and hail, all of that as well. And activities expected probably into day 3, I think. No, it's supposed to quiet down, luckily, as we get towards day 3, but it's severe weather season. It's late April. Today's also the day, I just remembered now, today is the day as well, when we had the Tuscaloosa tornado back in 2011 during the super outbreak, which occurred 13 years ago today. Well, it was actually a 3-day outbreak that began on the 25th. But 13 years ago today, we had a significant tornado in Alabama. So I did remember that. But just goes to show it's severe weather season. We're seeing a lot of severe weather activity right now. And that'll probably continue as severe weather season continues into next month. And then obviously after we get towards next month, we'll be into hurricane season, and before you know it, we'll be tracking tropical systems, and we'll see whether or not this season ends up record breaking, like the University of Pennsylvania is forecasting it to be. All things we will find out in the next few weeks, I am very sure. With that being said, though, that's going to close it off for this week's discussion. I would really appreciate it if you like, comment, subscribe, and share with family and friends. You know, we gotta grow the community, and I really do appreciate you doing everything you gotta do. You know what I mean, but would really appreciate it. Have seen that we've gotten a few subscribers recently, a few more subscribers, and I just want to say really quickly, welcome you in, and obviously, get more people. We got to get more people, especially on YouTube. We got to grow, and hopefully we'll be able to do that in the next 2 weeks as we get closer towards hurricane season. But anyways, with that being said, I'm going to wrap it up. I'm going to get this online for you guys to watch. And with that being said, have a good rest of your weekend and a good rest of your incoming week. We'll talk again on Saturday.